Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining this morning. My name is Josh Ryer. I'm the Managing Director of Technical Staff here at the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority. Today, we'll be discussing the RFP that we recently issued, RFP number 2203, already found a typo, -05, which is soliciting an Interconnection Working Group Facilitator, which actually will be delegated and working with our Office of Education Outreach and Enforcement. To the next slide. Sorry, unfortunately, the slide is delayed on my side, so we'll give it a second. Give me 1 second. Unfortunately, PowerPoint is, oh, there we go. Great. So just to give, to start out with giving a little bit of background into the Interconnection Working Group, also known as the IX Working Group. So this working group was established out of the November 25th, 2020 decision in docket 171203 REO6, which for those of you that are familiar with PURA's Equitable Modern Grid Framework or Initiative, that docket was the 6th out of 11 tracks or dockets that were initiated under the Equitable Modern Grid Initiative. This decision actually set up 2 working groups, an interconnection policy working group, as well as an interconnection technical working group. As a practical matter, however, the 2 working groups have been working together over the past several years. And so for efficiency, we just refer to them as one working group currently, or the IX working group. And that, as I mentioned at the top of the slides, it's actually a working group that's been delegated to the authority's Office of Education Outreach and Enforcement. However, as we're actually seeking to supplement their expertise and they're currently resource constrained, it doesn't make a ton of sense to ask those that are already resource constrained to facilitate and issue an RFP. So my office has taken that on. As you can see here from the mission of the Interconnection Working Group is to accelerate safe, reliable, and economical interconnections of distributed energy resources in Connecticut through a transparent and informal public forum where technical and policy stakeholders openly share their experience, knowledge, and challenges on common ground where solutions and recommendations to policymakers strive for consensus so that renewable energy in Connecticut can flourish while leading the nation through an example of mutual respect and collaboration. So that's really the, in addition to the objectives that have recently been set out by the authority in our performance-based regulation docket, this mission really paired with those objectives from our PBR docket really will set the direction and do set the direction for the Interconnection Working Group. Great. So to get into the consultant responsibilities that we're looking for, there's really 2 categories of things. And to summarize it, we're looking for someone to help administer and facilitate the group, the working group, but also to provide technical expertise regarding interconnection policies and procedures. So in terms of administrative tasks, you'll see in the left column, and all of this, to be clear, is detailed in the RFP that was previously released and is on PURA's website. But you can see here on the left-hand column for administrative tasks, it'll really start with understanding the current state of the Interconnection Working Group. How frequently have they been meeting? What topics have they covered? What topics are urgent in the eyes of the stakeholders that participate in those working group meetings? And what is the plan and what needs to be the plan moving forward to address those urgent priorities? The facilitator will schedule and attend all meetings. They'll be responsible for notifying members of upcoming meetings, as well as posting notes to a website. They'll, similar or related tasks would be to draft agendas and distribute those agendas ahead of time. And then also the facilitator will help EOE staff. Again, that's the PURA's Office of Education, Outreach, and Enforcement. You'll help EOE staff with their role in mediating any disputes among Interconnection Working Group members. And then ultimately, you'll oversee any votes that are held during the working group. In terms of technical tasks, you'll, of course, review the interconnection guidelines and application forms. And then you'll help to strategize and discuss and implement and make recommendations to the authority on how to improve the interconnection process. We've listed a few ways that we would like the facilitator to, or a few things that we'd like the facilitator to think about, but this is, of course, not an exhaustive list. Just to be clear on the second to last bullet for technical tasks, all of the recommendations that the Interconnection Working Group comes to, for the most part, need to come before the authority before they can be implemented. So it will be the facilitator's role to really draft those recommendations and those filings to be submitted to PURA for formal review and approval, modification, or denial. And then in doing that, and just in conducting the overall task of administering the working group, we'd ask that the facilitator make sure to conduct and be aware of national best practices regarding interconnection standards and procedures. Great. So moving on to preferred qualifications, really there's 4 buckets here. We've already touched on, or I've already touched on 2 of these 4 in terms of we'd expect that the consultant to have experience facilitating groups, moderating discussions, and mediating disputes, which is on the top left there. On the bottom right, we'd also expect the facilitator to have deep interconnection policy and procedure and utility interconnection procedure expertise and familiarity in other jurisdictions, and preferably Connecticut specific expertise in those policies and procedures, which then brings us to the top right. Familiarity generally with electric utility and public utility commission practices and procedures is going to be important, not only in helping to facilitate this group, but providing expertise and recommendations on improvements to the utilities processes, and then knowing and having wherewithal to make recommendations on how to engage with the authority appropriately to make recommendations is going to be crucial. And then, of course, with any consultants that the authority looks to hire, we, of course, expect a high quality work product and a commitment from the consultant to providing high quality work product and excellent client service. Great. So next, we want to talk about proposal requirements. For those, I see a couple of familiar faces. For those that are familiar with our RFP structure, table 1 in section 3 of the RFP, as always, contains the required proposal components. We ask that you stick to that script, as it were, and give us responses and structure your proposal as we've requested there in table 1. Of course, sometimes there are extra things that consultants like to provide or propose. We certainly welcome that, but please find a way to stick to the structure and or provide that subsequent information or supplemental information as an attachment. We also ask that you follow the cost estimate breakdown template in section 3E, which allows for standard reporting and makes it easier, frankly, for us to compare different proposals. I will say we get questioned frequently about how to prepare that. Like my previous answer in terms of what to do with supplemental information, we'd ask that you follow the cost estimate breakdown, but if you would like to provide additional breakdowns based on different factors or different assumptions, that of course is welcomed. The more information you can provide the authority in making our determination, the more helpful it is to us. So we always appreciate that. Great. And then in terms of next steps, there's really two categories of next steps that I want to walk through. One is the specific RFP schedule. So we're here today, August 1st. This, of course, was the pre-proposal bidders conference. By the end of today, we'd ask that any consultants that are intending to bid submit that intent to the email address here, pura.rfp@ct.gov. It's not a binding requirement, but it is helpful to us to understand the level of interest. It's also helpful to us in that we make sure that anyone that indicates their intention to bid today gets all of the relevant information from here on out. We also have a clarifying question deadline of August 9th. We allow for consultants to submit in questions on our RFPs, and then we aim to provide responses to everybody for everyone's benefit a week later on August 16th. Proposals are then ultimately due on August 30th. We hope to, and it's really important here, we don't typically actually provide a specific timeline or next steps regarding commencement of services. But here we really want to indicate and make clear to anyone that submits their intent that we intend on having whoever is selected as the facilitator to really come on and help EOE very quickly. Currently, we'd hope that the consultant would come on and assume the facilitator role in October of this year. So the steps that are required to meet that would be consultant selection in early of September of this year, contract execution roughly in the middle of September, coordination with the relevant EOE staff. As I mentioned earlier, they'll be running the working group, and as it's been delegated to them, and so you'll be working directly with that staff. So you'll have to have meetings late in September and early October with them to get on the same page. And then, as I mentioned, ultimately, the goal is to have the facilitator, the consultant that's hired as the facilitator, to assume those duties in October of this year. So I ran through all of that fairly quickly. I appreciate everyone bearing with me, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any at this time.
Josh?
Please, I saw two. You can go ahead, Stephanie.
Okay, a couple quick questions. Having worked with work groups, it's hard to predict how far you'll get until the money runs out. So is there any specific expectation that certain objectives will have been met in a certain time frame? I wasn't really seeing, expectation about number of reports or where you expect to be within a certain time period. So is this really, are you looking for folks just to propose a team that would work with the team as it's already been, operating and functioning for the last couple of years, and just, it's hard to identify a deliverable, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and fair enough observations. So yes, I think how you categorized it there, in that we're looking for someone, really our objective here is EOE, as I mentioned earlier, is resource constrained. Unlike the authority in my staff, they have fewer number of folks to engage on the same number of technical issues, right? So although they've been doing a great job over the last couple of years, we're really looking to be more fair to them, to provide them with a resource for someone to just kind of take the things that have been occurring over the last couple of years and to continue doing that, but to do so with an external resource, right? So that they are able to optimize their resources internally for the other priority issues that they have as well. So if, my recommendation would be to look at what the really, I would say, since formation, so early 2021 into early this year, looking at what the working group has typically done, they meet fairly regularly. They submit a couple of filings to the authority for our review annually. So I think it would be really, the proposal would be extrapolating on, okay, what would it take if a consultant was going to supplement or really replace the EOE staff that was doing that, and now this consultant's doing that over the next however many years. And then, as I think most of the folks on this call know, we do have a statutory cap of $200,000 per docket. We have not used any of that money for this proceeding yet, 1712-03 RE06. So the full 200,000 is available to us. So I think the question to my mind is, what type of runway would that give us based on, you know, the historical workload of the working group? It might be a year, it might be 2 years. That would really be the question that I would be looking for to be answered with the proposed budget.
My other question goes to conflicts. I'm not a SME in DER and interconnection, but I have folks that I usually try to partner with, and you know, folks that know anything would probably have conflicts, and maybe they would have worked at some point or done work for some of the members of the work group. And so I'm trying to get a sense of what you would consider, you know, a conflict for sort of the subject matter expert person.
Sure. It's hard to give a specific answer without knowing the details, right, of the potential conflict. What I will say is that we ask for any consultants or any subcontractors that you plan to work with, for you to disclose anything that's even bordering on or anything that has this smell of or close to a conflict, as conflicts are not disqualifying. It's just information that's helpful to us in the evaluation process.
So if you would look at the membership list of the current work group and say, have they done, I mean, because most engineering firms have done work for utilities, and a lot of the, I mean, for you to know this stuff inside and out, you've worked for developers, you work for utilities, et cetera. So would they look at the membership list and say whether they've done work for the current members of the work group? Would that be the right way?
Yeah, I would ask that they give us two things. One, who on that list they have done work for, and the nature and the description of the nature of the work. And well, I guess, and maybe a third, as part of a description of the type of work, the duration of that engagement.
Okay, that helps. Thanks.
Tom? No problem.
Yeah. So is there I get the budget burn will say how long we might be able to support the working groups for, but is there any statutory or regulatory end date to these working groups that I just?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, it's indefinite. I mean, off the cuff here a little bit, what I would say is the $200,000 runway, like I said, we're looking to see how far that'll get us, but it's also kind of an initial test period to see not only what, you know, whether or not a third-party consultant is the right way to go, whether or not the engagement with whoever we select here makes sense. We'll, of course, either way, regardless of who we select, because it's, as you implied, this is an indefinite working group, we'll eventually hit the $200,000 threshold and have to figure something else out. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there. I think we're seeing this as kind of an initial assessment period.
And
Great. Oh, good.
A follow-up question, if that's okay, which is, how deep, well, this might be that some of my colleagues have been following the interconnection group, working group much closer than I, and weren't available today. How deep is the level of technical expertise that would be helpful to facilitate this group. I'm sure, being omniscient would be helpful, but since nobody is, are we, all the examples you brought up were pretty much from the perspective of, applicants to a system, what would facilitate more DG, but it wasn't necessarily from utilities system perspective. So how much about like resiliency to the grid? Maybe I'm not articulating this, but maybe from the utility side, should one expect to bring to this?
Yeah, no, that's a
something.
good, no, that's, yeah, no, that's, I think the question's clear to me in terms of, and maybe I'll articulate it back just to make sure I've got it, is there's two types of technical expertise you could have here. There's from a developer's perspective or from an EDC's internal perspective, and
Yeah.
while there's an intersection, they can and are slightly different in terms of the types of expertise and the perspective. So you're looking to see how much of both we're hoping or requiring of the prospective consultant. Is that correct?
That great job articulating my
Perfect.
question.
So I think you gave the perfect answer at the beginning. We'd love all of it, right? In an ideal world, I think a baseline understanding of both types of expertise and perspectives is, I would say, at least the minimum, right? Familiarity. So the way I was communicating earlier, from on the utility side of things, we would expect at least a baseline understanding of how the utilities analyze hosting capacity, for example, the different internal procedures that utilities typically go through in evaluating projects, and how, from their perspective, the types of things that they're protecting against and what they value in trying to maintain reliability, resilience, and safety. So there at least a baseline understanding from that perspective, and then on the other side, at least a baseline understanding of the types of objectives that DR providers are looking for and the information that they need. So again, the hosting capacity maps, the frequency that those are updated, the clarity of communication there, just the need for certainty, right, or the helpfulness of certainty. So so understanding at least the foundational considerations, I think, is of both sides, is kind of we would assume that any facilitator submitting into this understands rather. In terms of the technical expertise on both sides, like I said, we'd hope for both, but we'll have to evaluate. If we have one consultant that has more technical expertise from a DR interconnection or DR developer interconnection perspective, and then someone has more EDC internal expertise, we'll have to weigh those things against one another. I don't know if I'd say we value one over the other, but certainly we would expect as a baseline an understanding of both perspectives and the criteria and the types of things that both groups look at. Did that fully answer the question?
Good. Did a great job. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Eileen?
Yeah, I just have what is hopefully just a very straightforward question. I see that, like, in the past, these meetings have been conducted online. I think it said Teams. Are you anticipating that structure to continue, or are you anticipating it'll just continue being the online format?
We are, yes.
Perfect. Great. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Please, Stephanie.
Yeah, I did glance at some of the meeting notes from the earlier sessions, and I don't know how to ask this diplomatically. Some of them look very much like direct transcripts of capturing everything somebody said, as opposed to distillations of what was accomplished in a meeting. And so is the emphasis on making sure all participants get to be heard? Are there different levels of expertise among the participants? I mean, do you have sort of, you have engineers participating, or do you have, retail developer marketing people that, participating who don't understand technical things? I'm trying to get a sense of, what there's an expectation that the way the work group is working is going to continue with the new facilitator, as opposed to there's a new sheriff in town, I guess, and they will be trying to make it much more effective. So I'm assuming it's the former. You want to continue with sort of the method that's been established over the last couple of years. But it did kind of read a little bit like the emphasis is on making sure everyone gets to say it. So it sometimes it looked more like a participants group and sometimes less like a technical working group. And so when you've combined policy and technical working group together in one group, how is that? You handle that by subgroups, subcommittees, and things like that?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I have a couple answers to that. First off, I just want to note, unfortunately, so the working group has been run by EOE, and the reason I and my office are running this RFP, as I mentioned earlier, is their resource constraints. So unfortunately, the folks that could give you the best direct answer to how it's been running is actually EOE, who is not conducting this RFP. So I just want to note that.
Sure.
But in terms of, yeah, I mean, certainly the objective, I think there's two answers to your question. The first is the objective, as I think we fairly clearly laid out in the REO 6 decision, is for this working group to be a forum for folks to feel heard and for their opinions to be heard, analyzed, and addressed. Having said that, it is, it's a mixed bag of expertise. And we're always, I think folks that have been following PURA closely, we're always interested in working towards whatever the best solution is, regardless of what we've done in the past. So we would not be, I would not be concerned with, or think it would be incongruent with past decisions or the authority's general direction if you were to come in and to make, suggest changes, suggest that we did originally envision these technical working groups to be separate for some of the reasons that you listed. So moving them back to separate working groups may actually be more appropriate. The other thing I would say, and this is more of a personal piece of advice, is doing that gradually probably would make the most sense, but certainly you'd want to do that in partnership with the working group and the EOE staff that this has been delegated to and that you'll be working closely with. Great. Are there any other questions? All right, well, seeing none, I really appreciate everybody's time and interest in this. As you know, interconnection policies and queues and backlogs, there is an issue across the country, and getting this right and addressing it now is vitally important to meeting our climate goals. So really appreciate your interest and look forward to reviewing your proposals.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank
thanks,
you.
Josh.
Thank you. Have a great one.